Life under lockdown. France completes day one of a 15-day nationwide curfew in an effort to contain the coronavirus. We must act as a wartime government, the words of the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson as the UK vows to ramp up its fight against COVID-19 after being criticised for his wait-and-see approach. And could Americans soon be receiving $1,000 checks in the mail? The Trump administration says it's pursuing a $1 trillion stimulus package to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. Thanks for joining us. I'm Julia Kim. Well, France's 60 million residents were confined to their homes as the first day of a nationwide curfew came into effect. There are over 1,000 new coronavirus infections in the country, tipping the total to over 7,700. As the outbreak spreads, the French Open and the Euro 2020 have both been called off. Meanwhile, Belgium announced it will follow France, Italy and Spain in imposing a curfew. Karis Garland takes a look at some of the reactions to the lockdown on social media.
It's a tweet that's been viewed over 500,000 times, and its message is clear.
Surtout, restez chez vous.
To make his point, French astronaut Thomas Pesquet called on past experience and a bit of humour.
So what happens when an astronaut is stuck at home? For provisions, there's no panic or risk of a food shortage. I'm used to tin food anyway, and here it stays on the plate. To remind myself of good memories from the space station, I even installed a vertical sleeping bag.
People all over France took to social media to share their first day in lockdown, like this family in Perpignan near the border with Spain, who have carefully planned out the coming days.
In the morning, we're focusing on school activities given to the kids by their teacher. We've planned games and free time.
In Alsace, this family enjoys time in their garden. For them, it's a few square meters of calm in the French region most affected by the coronavirus outbreak.
We feel safe when we are at home, because it's our usual environment. We are really scared for our health, for our daughters, for the people we know who could be infected.
It's the first of at least 15 days of lockdown for 67 million French people. 100,000 police officers have been deployed across the country to enforce the rule, which prohibits people from leaving home except for necessary reasons.
Well, the United Kingdom government has pledged a £330 billion lifeline for businesses as the coronavirus continues to batter the economy. Meanwhile, the number of deaths from the COVID-19 rose to 71. A day after France's president declared the country was at war against the virus, Britain's premier also adopted similar language. Take a listen.
We must act like any wartime government and do whatever it takes to support our economy. And that's the main purpose of this press conference this afternoon. We must support millions of businesses and tens of millions of families and individuals through the coming months. And to do that, the government machine must and will respond with a profound sense of urgency. Thousands of brilliant officials are already working round the clock, but we must do more and faster.
President Trump has called for a unified national response to the coronavirus pandemic after being criticized for downplaying the threat. There are COVID-19 cases in all 50 US states, but they've all been dealing with the crisis differently. Trump's call comes as the White House says it's pursuing a $1 trillion stimulus package that will deliver $1,000 checks to Americans. The number of deaths nationwide has crossed 100 and the total number of infections has surged past 6,400. President Trump had earlier refused to impose any blanket bans on public gatherings. France 24's Ketevan Gorgestani has more from Washington.
That's despite calls from many state governors to Donald Trump to show national leadership and to call for these nationwide bans or shutdowns or calls, but something really federal on the federal level. And since Donald Trump simply repeated what he had said yesterday in his press conference about not gathering in groups of more than 10, about trying not to travel, about staying away from bars and restaurants, and these all recommendations, states are continuing to take matters into their own hand. We saw yesterday more than a dozen states already implementing some of these partial shutdowns, mostly of bars and restaurants, gyms, all these non-essential businesses. The biggest and strictest measures were taken in the San Francisco Bay Area, which implemented a shelter-in-place order. That means that people are asked to stay at home, not to go out unless they have to go to the pharmacy, the doctor, or the supermarket. So it's something that looks pretty similar to what you're seeing in France or Italy, for example, but without the strict enforcement of fines or notes and derogations to be allowed to go outside. But people really urged to stay. That includes about 7 million people in that San Francisco Bay Area. Meanwhile, in New York City, we are seeing the mayor, Bill de Blasio, considering that same shelter-in-place order. There's been a bit of a back and forth between Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, and the governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, who said that he was not going to implement any quarantine of the state of New York. But Bill de Blasio, again, today saying that he was indeed considering that shelter-in-place order for New York City and that a decision would be made in the next 48 hours. He asked New York City residents to prepare for that event and that he would really make that decision in the coming 48 hours. So you really see these states deciding on their own, and that also counts for elections. Remember, there are primaries taking place today. 3 states decided to maintain these primaries, including Florida, for example. But one state, Ohio, its governor deciding to postpone the elections despite a court rejecting its request. He called it a health emergency and decided to postpone it until further notice.
Well, fears over the pandemic have overshadowed the election calendar in the United States. But former Vice President Joe Biden is no doubt happy after winning the Florida and Illinois primaries, notching up big victories over Senator Bernie Sanders in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. It's another blow to Sanders, whose early lead has all but evaporated. Meanwhile, Donald Trump clinched the Republican presidential nomination on Tuesday after a primary victory in Illinois, an expected development considering he had no major competition. Well, let's turn now to Iraq, where the president has named a pro-Western lawmaker as the next prime minister. Adnan Zerfi's nomination came as 2 separate rocket attacks hit the country, one near the Green Zone in Baghdad, the other struck a military base hosting US-led coalition troops and NATO troops. In a statement, Zerfi pledged to hold elections within 1 year of forming his cabinet. On top of renewed rocket attacks, he'll also have to contend with an anti-government protest movement, collapsing oil prices, and of course, the coronavirus outbreak. And finally, Parisians in confinement have come together to show their appreciation for healthcare workers. Residents cheered and played music from their balconies to pay tribute to those on the front lines. The virus has infected almost 200,000 people worldwide, and doctors and nurses are often the ones who put themselves most at risk. We'll leave you with those images there. Parisians paying tribute to the medical workers on the front line.